In today's episode, my guest and I discuss RPG actual play podcasts.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt, and I am your host. This is the podcast where we talk all things tabletop RPGs and other topics that help us all become better game masters and better role players. If you don't know who I am, my name is Matt Davids. I am the author of the Book of Random Tables and its sequels. I have random tables for fantasy, for science fiction, for cyberpunk, for Wild West, for modern, for the 1920s and 30s, and more to help game masters cut down their prep time, because nobody's got time for that anymore, right? If you want to find them, you can head over to DiceGeeks.com, you can go to Amazon.com, you can go to DriveThruRPG.com, just search for Dice Geeks, all one word, or the Book of Random Tables. Now, I have an awesome interview today. Let's just jump right in. My guest today is the creator and game master behind the Tale of the Manticore podcast, Jon Cohen. Jon, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Matt. So glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
When were you first introduced to tabletop role-playing games?
So I'm going to age myself immediately with this one, but I started out, I've been trying to think of exactly like how old I was. I think I was 10, and I had the so-called purple box, which is the Moldvay basic, starring like Morgan Ironwolf and Black Dougal and that cast of characters. It was my brother's set, and he must have like let me look at it one day, and I just was immediately captivated by the whole world of it. All that like Jeff D. and Errol Otis artwork, it was a bullseye for me. And I was kind of in love with it from then and have been ever since. I remember one of the first games we played was Keep on the Borderlands. That was the module that kind of came with that box set. And we were trying to figure out how this whole thing worked. Our experience with games up until then had been Monopoly or checkers and that kind of thing. And I remember reading through that rule book and thinking like, so a turn, that must be my turn. And then after my turn, it must be your turn. That's like how we interpreted turns and rounds and stuff. It took a while to get it. I guess we weren't the sharpest knives.
I think that happens to everybody when you're exposed to Dungeons and Dragons for the first time without the internet to show you how to play and all kinds of things like that.
This was well before the internet, yeah.
Yeah, and I was going to say, don't worry, I age myself every time I do an episode because I'm always saying, oh yeah, that was 1982, I guess, or something, and I was like, oh no, I just gave away my age.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was trying to think of when did that Dungeons & Dragons cartoon come out, because that was exactly like I was at the perfect age for that too, and that was instantly my favorite show, even though it was maybe not the highest quality writing ever, but boy did I love that. I would like get up early just to not miss a minute of the Dungeons & Dragons cartoon.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was 1983, and I did the same thing.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Because I was introduced to the game in 82 when I was 9, and then it was like, oh, there's a cartoon, just like 6 months later or something, and I was just like, oh my god.
So were you purple boxed too?
No, we actually played basic. I don't know if you know the. It's the red cover, basic, just a like a book that would fit into like a 3-ring binder. It had like a
yeah. Because they designed it, I think, to be taken apart and mixed in with the expert rules later. Nobody did that, but that was, I think, the intention, right?
I think so. But yeah, that was what we had played first. So it was the basic book. Although, I mean, we played it, but if we followed any of the rules, I really have no idea.
Right. Oh my God, I just remembered. I thought that I must have been like a good year. I thought Keep on the Borderlands meant like don't leave the Borderlands.
Yeah.
I was 10.
Yeah. Well, of course.
I hadn't read a book ever. So
actually, a few years ago, after like after my father had passed away and we were cleaning out my parents' house. In an old closet, like way back up in an old closet, I found all of these books, and I found that original basic rule book, and I opened it up, and it had all my characters from when I was like 9, 10, and 11 in it.
Oh, that is a treasure. Oh, I hope you still have it, right?
Oh, I do. And I actually like scanned them all in, and I wrote a blog post and stuff about it because I didn't want to lose them. But yeah, I kept them all. So it was something else. So yeah, I noticed that usually, I guess, the attributes were kind of like all 18s except for like
Yeah.
116, because it's unbelievable that you'd roll 6 18s or whatever.
So you had a little bit of verisimilitude there, like, oh, the 16 makes it believable. But I rolled these honest on my own right before the session.
Yep. Just rolled it. And and other things too that were just totally crazy. Like, I don't even know how I was like making any of the characters. It was just, but I mean, it was, I was so young, and I was probably hard to read the book and stuff. And so just jump in and play. I just need a sword and an 18 strength, and there we go.
Yep.
Did you kind of branch out from D&D after that?
I played a few of them, and again, it was all my brother doing the buying of the games. There was Gamma World, which I remember the books very well, and we probably tried a few games. I never really stuck. I still love the idea. It's still really cool. Never got really into it, but I do remember that one. There's another one called Top Secret, which was like a James Bond RPG. There was, what was the space one? Was it Star Frontiers?
Yes, and I played Star Frontiers.
Traveler was like, that was for the big boys. I think Traveler was for, a little bit more of a mature reader, maybe fewer pictures. Speaking of pictures, Palladium. That was another one that the artwork was just enough to totally fire the imagination. Again, didn't play it so much. Always came back to D&D for me, at least, at that age. And then of course we went on to the advanced and second edition, and I never actually got past that.
Oh, wow. So
that's not out of some kind of weird loyalty. I just actually left the hobby for decades.
Oh, okay. And that happens occasionally.
It does. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I played a lot of Star Frontiers, and I found that game as well. And I read some of the book, and it was like, I never played any of these rules. I don't know what I was doing. And then I played a lot of Palladium stuff as well. That was usually kind of a little later in the 90s for me, although I guess there was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles kind of in the late 80s there. And then
Heroes. Yeah, I remember when that came out, when Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles came out, it was really edgy at first. I don't know if you remember, like the first time you ever heard of it, it was this edgy thing. And then of course it became like very much just for kids and pizza and
yeah, absolutely. It was kind of this edgy, it was like very violent.
Yeah, like an anti-comic in a way, right?
Yeah. Once Hollywood says, hey, we can make a cartoon out of this, you just say, that sounds great.
Exactly.
You just make some changes. That was a lot of fun. And then Heroes Unlimited from Palladium as well. Played some of that, although it was the system started giving me headaches after a while. But
is it more complex? I don't know that one.
Yeah, it's kind of the same Palladium system, but just, I don't know, maybe it was my age too, being kind of a teenager or something, and there was always just trying to interpret the rules between just a number of different people. It was just like calculating, like, you had your basic like health points or your hit points, and then you had your, what is it called? SDC or something, your structural damage capability or something. And it just seemed like, you were just getting lost in numbers every once in a while. And then you would go to the book and it would just be like, I don't know. It was just one of those things where it was like, I need somebody who has read this and mastered it to just tell me how to play it. Right.
That's your extra crunchy, I guess, huh?
It was just a lot of numbers, right? Like, I mean, nothing was like too complex. It was just like, you would just start adding numbers together, and then, forget maybe where you were. You would forget to add some in because this one skill gives you plus 30 to this one thing. And then sometimes you would double it, or, you would have to double it for things. And so sometimes you'd have a character with like 18 hit points, but they would have 750 or 728. I think it was called SDC or something, like structural damage capability.
Where did you get your stuff? Was there a hobby shop near you or a game store?
Oh yeah. When I was really young, I would just go to this hobby shop, trying to remember what it was called. I think it was called Checkered Flag, just like Checkered Flag Hobbies. And it was a local thing here in St. Louis. My mom would always go there to pick up like crafting and quilting supplies or something. And lo and behold, there's like an aisle of role-playing games right over there. Right. So that's where I bought my first game. I bought, what was it? Marvel Superheroes, I think was the first one that I bought. And then Star Frontiers and what was the big one? I discovered West End Star Wars there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You just reminded me of Villains and Vigilantes.
Oh,
remember that one? Villains and Vigilantes. Jeff D did a lot of the artwork for that one too.
I do. I remember the title, but I don't think I ever played it or anything. And so, so that's where I would buy them. But then when I was able to when I started driving and stuff like that, I found some other hobby shops and some game shops that were around. We would go there, and that's when I started getting more into some of the Palladium games, because the hobby shop didn't carry the Palladium games, but the game shops did. And so that's when, I found Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I guess they did Robotech as well. And then the Heroes Unlimited system, or setting, I guess, for the Palladium system. And so that's when I kind of started really branching out, trying to do other things, because, I mean, sadly at that time, like for me, it was very difficult to find somebody to play like, second edition Dungeons and Dragons. Even though I had a few friends who were into it, it was, I don't know what it was. It was just something with the time period, or kind of a lull perhaps in some of the gaming. It was just the books were very expensive. The rules were very complex. If we had time to hang out, we would just, we'd make one character, and then that would be all of the time we had to hang out and stuff. So we really started playing Star Wars, the West End game system, quite a lot, because you could make a character in 10 minutes and be playing within, a half hour or so.
Somehow I missed the Star Wars one, but I've always been like, in my heart, it's swords and sorcery fantasy for me.
Okay. Yeah. So not really science fiction.
I like it, but it's not my bag. The way that D&D, it's just D&D. It comes back to D&D.
Yeah, well, D&D is awesome. Yeah, and that was something that was interesting for me too. It was just like, I had been out of D&D for a while, and then just playing a few other games here and there. And of course, as I got older, but then I played 4th edition twice. And then when 5th edition hit, my gaming group decided to look into it, and it just kind of took off. And we were all like, hey, this is really cool. And it was like coming home again for me, that I hadn't played in a long time.
I want that feeling very much, and it's strange to say, but actually I've never played 5th edition, mostly because I've been away from the hobby for so long, and when I kind of finally came back to it very recently, COVID-19 happened, and so there were no gaming groups. You probably can already tell my internet connection isn't very good. I can't maintain like was it Roll20 or whatever, so I can't play online either. So I think I'm just going to have to wait until the world is feeling better, and then find a group here in town. But I think I will actually do it. I'm very curious to try 5th edition.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of fun, and it's kind of one of those things where it was familiar enough to where, it feels like some of the stuff that I remembered when I was a kid, but then it has some of the new kind of stuff to it as well, that, that it's kind of keeps me, keeps you interested in that. And so, it's a lot of fun. So, definitely, if you can't get your internet sorted out, then you definitely need to find a gaming group, because it is really fun. For us too, like I said, we had been playing Star Wars for a long time. I had played Star Trek some, kind of the old fastest system. In my gaming group, we had kind of got to this place where we had played, a lot of Star Wars, and we'd played a few other games, and it was just like, why not go back to D&D? And we tried 4th edition a couple times. One friend tried it on 4th edition, and then it was like 5th edition kind of came out, and we just like tried it one time, and then I think like more than half of us just bought most of the books for it, and we were like, okay, we're playing D&D now. Well, now you were saying you were away from the hobby for quite a bit, but you have started a role-playing game podcast. Why would you start a role-playing game podcast?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I ask myself sometimes, because boy, these things take a long, as I'm sure you know, these things take a long time to make. So why am I doing this? While I was away from it, and like most people, I just kind of, probably in my late teens, I had to choose between girls and D&D, and I chose girls, and then I just left it. And yeah, it's sad, but it's true. At least it was true then. Yeah. I think that has changed.
I think it has.
I think it's changed. Although,
well, I chose role-playing games, so I can't laugh at anybody. I should have probably totally chose girls.
You have chosen unwisely.
Yes.
No, I'm not sure which is better. Looking back, let's see. So I never lost the interest. Like that D&D heroin hit from childhood, always chasing that wonderment. And to be honest, it never has been as good. So when I was in my teens, I discovered fantasy novels, and that was like a surrogate D&D game. Mm-hmm. And then there were, like the Lord of the Rings movies, and that was a kind of a surrogate D&D thing. And of course, computer games, another kind of surrogate D&D thing. And to be honest, boy, has the quality of the games, did that ever improve by leaps and bounds. I think it was a good old games just released Eye of the Beholder, and I thought, oh, that'll be fun. I'm going to give that a try, but it's unplayable. Like you just can't go back sometimes.
Oh no.
Yeah. You'll see what I mean. Give it a try. Anyway, so I always tried to like keep some element of fantasy in my life in some way. And then I guess most recently it would be like Game of Thrones, and finally they really got it right. At least maybe until that last season with Game of Thrones. And so like it's, the fire has always been like burning in there somewhere, no matter how small. And at some point, I guess just having a commute to work, I'm a high school teacher. Actually, a lot of podcasters are, it's kind of weird. But I would fill my commute with podcasts. And so something led me to the Adventure Zone at some point. I don't know, probably through, Mabim Bam or something. I found the Adventure Zone, and that got me looking at other D&D podcasts, and I found some really good ones like God's Fall. Listened to that for a long time, and somehow stumbled upon one called The Iron Realm. Have you ever heard of that one?
I'm not recalling it.
It's not as high profile as these other ones, but it was this guy, Abel Enzo, who basically he was doing a solo D&D game, and it was just like a crawl. It was a dungeon crawl, and he would have segments where he would basically play the game on mic, and then he would have a segment that did a little bit of like character bio, and then he would have a segment where he discussed the rules. And actually, when I first heard this, I didn't realize that the rules had been open sourced. And I thought, oh, is he just reading the basic D&D rules in his podcast? Whatever. And something about his show, it's very DIY and very like, it's a one-man show. But boy, it was so compelling. And it was like lightning in a bottle. It really captured those early games that, when I was 10 or 11 or 12 years old, it captured that vibe perfectly, for lack of a better word, vibe. And so I started to listen to it, and I think when I discovered it, there were probably 50 episodes of it. And they were all pretty short, like half hour. And so I would listen to 2 a day, commute to work, commute back, and I was just gobbling this stuff up. And so that made me want to find more awesome podcasts. And so I just downloaded everything I could think of, and sampled it. And I sort of stumbled on this phenomenon where D&D podcasts, and I think this is science. This is just science. This is fact. D&D podcasts are like 99% comedy, and I'm not sure why, but they are. If you go to the fantasy section of your local bookstore, it's going to be 99% quote unquote serious fantasy, for lack, I don't know what the right term would be, but Lord of the Rings style fantasy, and then 1% would be your Terry Pratchett or something like that. But it seems like the podcast world is flipped, where almost every podcast I would listen to would start off with like, hey, okay, we're going to introduce your characters. Okay, Tommy, who are you playing? Tommy's like, oh, I'm playing a human fighter, and my name is Ellis, and I just want to kill some goblins. Okay, great, thanks, Tommy. Who's next? Joey, who are you got? And Joey would be like, I'm playing a gnome barbarian with a strength of 18 and an intelligence of 3. And it just seemed like every single podcast had this Jar Jar Binks character in it that as soon as I heard it, I'd be like, delete, next. But it just came up and up and up. Anyway, this is my very, very long way of coming back to the question, why did I make this podcast? It's because I really wanted this podcast to exist. I didn't want to have to make it. I just wanted to listen to it. But it wasn't really there. And so I guess I discovered whether there was like a demand for it or not. I was like, well, this is a niche. Nobody's doing this. And I want to hear it. So I thought, if the Iron Realm can do it, well, I guess I could do it. And so that's how I started. And actually, the early stages of getting into it were kind of odd because I didn't want to tell anybody. I didn't tell my partner I was doing this. It was very closet RPG geek, and so I would try and do it at work. So after the students would leave the high school, I would go into a classroom and try and record an episode on my phone, and then I'd come home and edit it with headphones on, and it just sounded like garbage. And then COVID-19 happened, and my partner and I are in the apartment together in a very small space almost all the time. So one day I just said honey, I'm gonna make a Dungeons and Dragons podcast. Actually, she was super, super supportive right from the start. I never needed to hide it in the first place. I was being an idiot. I think I may have gotten into the weeds there. Did I answer the question eventually?
No, you answered the question. I know there was a lot there, and just picking.
Sorry.
No. That's fine. That's what we're here to. We're here to talk about things and to learn about things. So it was, and I am always.
Do you find
interested.
that too? I gotta know. What's with the comedy podcast? Why is it all comedy?
Well, that's what I was just going to talk about. It's all comedy. I don't know why. And
do you have a hot take on this? Okay, I have a coworker who is into D&D, and she and I had been talking. She's a math teacher, and I had mentioned this phenomenon to her, and it was just like one of those sort of water cooler conversations that you have at work. Like, hey, how come people in the movies never say hello or goodbye on a phone? They just hang up on each other. Like, what's up with that? Anyway, so I was asking her because I knew that she listened to RPG actual play podcasts. I was like, why are they all comedies? I love them, but I wasn't looking for that. I want that, and I want the serious one too. But the serious one didn't exist. So I was telling her why is it that every podcast I turn on, it's like I'm playing a tabaxi pirate with 2 wooden legs and specialty in alchemy, whatever. And then she was kind of look at me funny, and I'd be like, and also they have a pet tarantula named Dennis. It's always something like that. And then she was like, oh, that's hilarious. I would totally listen to that. So I guess that's my answer. I guess the answer is because that's what people really, really want.
I had been wondering that for actually quite a while because, before I left my day job and went into the kind of the wiles of doing RPG stuff full time, which, my wife was kind of like, what are we doing? What are we doing? But
Anyone who can do it must be doing something extremely right. So congratulations for that. That's
all right,
amazing.
well, thank you. I hope. It seems like I make a mistake every day or something, but I'm trying to do something. But, because I would listen to a lot of podcasts, when I had my day job, especially, I would listen to a ton. And because a lot of my day job was just like looking at a spreadsheet with like 10,000 columns and stuff, and I would have went insane if I couldn't listen to something. But it was just like I would look for a new podcast and I would see one and I go, oh, that looks really cool. It looks really professional. It looks really cool. I'd turn it on and they'd start cracking jokes and I'd turn it off. And
so the same experience. So if there are so many people like us, or maybe it's just us, then why is there nothing to serve them? Because I could probably list dozens and dozens and dozens of the sort of like silly ones, right?
Yeah.
But I think I would be taxed to list a half a dozen of the sort of take it serious ones. I don't know what to call the genre. We'll just call it serious fantasy. That sounds like oxymoron, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
There's just very few. I guess if you think about something like like the Matt Mercer stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I would kind of consider that, I guess it straddles the line, right? It's not comedy, but some of it is like very ridiculous. Like situationally, it's so extremely high fantasy. It's kind of funny,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I guess there's maybe even 3 different categories, right? There's the ones that are just pure comedy, like there's Dungeons and Daddies, which is amazingly funny, so good, but it's just comedy. They're not trying to do anything serious at all. And then there's maybe stuff on my end, which is kind of like no laughing ever. And then there's stuff in the middle, which is kind of like they're playing a game, but then there's a lot of beer and pretzels, laughs and yucks along the way.
It's probably the cynical side of me, but I was thinking one time, I think Wizards of the Coast was having like a big streaming thing. They were announcing one of a new campaign book or something. I can't remember exactly, and they had all of these different groups who were doing actual play. And I popped into the stream a few times, and it was just like every time. It was like, oh, this new group from Australia who's playing D&D. Oh, and they're a comedy group.
Uh-huh.
And then it was like, oh, and then this group from wherever is playing this. They're a comedy group from Orlando, Florida or something. And I was just like, why are all these comedy groups doing it? And the only thing, like I said, probably because I'm cynical, but I was just thinking, there's obviously a market for actual play podcasts. We've seen that. That's been tested. But I was just wondering, it's kind of one of those things where you kind of mistake, silliness for comedy, because sometimes, you'll do something silly while you're playing a game or something and your friends think it's funny. So my cynical take would be, I think perhaps a lot of groups might think it would be just easy to do like a comedy podcast because you're being silly or you make mistakes a whole bunch of times or something like that. So that's the cynical part of me.
You might be onto something there. It is kind of, it's easy to do comedy. I think it's probably really, really hard to do good comedy because, I'm sure you've noticed that there's a spectrum of quality in the comedy too, right? There's people that not everyone is the McElroy brothers, right? They're amazing. And most people think they're maybe funnier than they are. I'm kind of coming across like a Scrooge McDuck here, but there's a lot of comedy podcasts that are extremely unfunny.
Yeah.
We won't name a name.
Like I said, it's probably just me because I'm cynical now, and I'm getting into a curmudgeon stage of life or something. I don't know. But like, I just remember back when I was in college, I studied filmmaking and screenwriting, and we had to make student films. And just every once in a while, I think I perhaps fell prey to this. You think you can do like a sitcom or a little comedy kind of sketch because all you need to be is a little silly. And if you mess up the camera, that's funny, or something like this. And I think could possibly be some of that's going in there, and then but not realizing to actually have comedy and to actually be funny, that there's a different level to that, and there's a lot of skill actually involved in actually telling very good jokes and having some good comedy. Saying your name silly or questioning the game master on some silly point, or trying to make, a pun here or there that doesn't really make much sense and wouldn't be found funny unless, you're a group of friends at, 2 a.m. or something. It's just not funny. And,
right.
And so I do find that kind of frustrating as well. But yeah, then there are the podcasts who get it and they get it right, and they are funny, and they're a blast to kind of listen to every once in a while. But I do find myself kind of turning off the ones that are trying to make jokes all the time.
Definitely. One more thought on this. I feel like I could talk about this for a long, long time, but maybe your listeners don't necessarily want to hear me. Just about the amount of comedy in the podcast world and where are all the serious ones. But if you go to like the very first Acquisitions Incorporated podcast, like episode 1.
Yeah, I listened to it.
I actually re-listened to it because I had this idea in my head and I wanted to find out if it was true. So I re-listened to it, and when they're getting together and they're having, their little character generation thing, and they're joking about, but it's still kind of like, the expectation is they're going to play maybe a serious game of D&D with some laughs along the way. And when it comes time for like Jim Dark Magic, like, what's your character's name? Jim. And when that moment happens, you can actually hear Scott Kurtz say, no. He just says, no. And I think that he was going through exactly what I feel every time I try out a new podcast, and there's that inevitable moment where, I'm playing an anti-paladin tiefling, except I'm 9 feet tall and I'm really bad at coming up with this stuff on the fly. But yeah, always like check out how ridiculous my character build is. And then there's always like, there's always like a pet ferret named Felix or something. There's always that.
I listened to that episode as well. Yes, you can hear the dungeon master just be like in horror, just like you cannot.
The train comes off the rails, and now it's a different podcast. And it turned into a great podcast. I enjoyed the series, but I feel in my heart that initially it wasn't going to be that.
Yeah. Though that has something to do with probably the game masters and dungeon masters take themselves very seriously on occasions. And players are there to like joke around, and the game master, me as the game master, the dungeon master, I mean, I had this experience with a lot of my friends, especially when I was younger. I show up to tell Lord of the Rings, serious, epic storytelling with moral and ethical, with complications all wrapped up, and they're there to fool around for a few hours.
That's it. Exactly. Yeah. Because it happens at the table too, right? Like you're going to have a serious game, and then quite often it's the person that doesn't really know the game well. And like, how are they going to fit in? Well, if you can make everyone laugh. And so there you got Jar Jar Binks with you.
Actually, this is a pretty interesting topic, but we have skipped a little bit about your podcast.
Sorry, this is like my pet peeve. Okay, let's talk about my podcast.
Okay, so the Tale of the Manticore. So you didn't want any laughs.
No,
I'm guessing
none.
It's
only misery.
What?
Only misery.
Only misery. Okay, so no laughs, only misery, and I assume that it is D&D. Either based or inspired. So why don't you tell us about Tale of the Manticore?
Sure. So when I started, I was inspired to build off the model of the Iron Realm, which had used the basic system. And I thought, well, I'm going to use the basic system for the same reason that that the Iron Realm does, which is it may not be the best system and it's far from a perfect one, but it is like very rules light. And I didn't want to spend a lot of time checking rules. I just wanted to be able to tell the story, even though if you listen to my podcast, it is a script. So it's not like I'm improvising and would have to go and, oh, hold on, everybody, I have to go and look up a rule. That wouldn't happen. But as I'm writing the script, that kind of is the actual play. And so if I had to stop and look up rules, which I do sometimes, it does break the continuity of my imagination, I guess. Anyway, so that's why I chose basic. Also, it's just a system I know really well, and I figured would be familiar to a lot of listeners. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
No, that's all right.
My wife just came in with a note that said 400 degrees, and I was like, what does this mean? She's preheating the oven. That's what it means. Okay.
Well, at least it's not in your apartment or in your house or whatever. That'd be bad.
There's the silver lining.
Yeah, I would advise you to get out. No, and then the format is a bit different than some of the other actual plays, especially like the ones we've been talking about. We talked about serious, but you're solo, right?
Yeah, and so because it's solo, and I have no improvisational skill, I thought I'll just write it, but it's definitely not like I'm writing a novel. It's much more gamified. I would kind of go, I don't know if it's 50-50 or 60-40, with the larger half being kind of novelization, but I do feel like there's a really big difference between what I'm doing and somebody who's reading, an audiobook, or listening to an audiobook, mostly because of the structural element of a novel or a story, right? Everybody learns it in school. I teach it. I'm an English teacher. There's a plot graph, right? And there's, you've got your protagonists. They have a problem. They go out of the frying pan into the fire over and over and over as tension mounts and danger increases. And then there's a climactic moment and a resolution. But my game isn't like that at all, right? Because there's protagonists and they have problems, but randomness and dice rolls determine what happens. And so I could have ended up with like a TPK in episode 3. It might have happened. And actually I was worried that would happen. And what would I do? Would I say like, I kind of set out my own rules, I guess, that I was just going to follow whatever the dice did. So I guess if that had happened, then that would have become like some kind of prologue, and I would have had to bring in all new characters, because I think it's really important with what I'm doing that there is a lot of randomness baked into it. And secondarily, that I never, ever, ever, ever fudge a dice roll. Like it's got to be genuine. Otherwise, what am I doing? I'm writing a book.
When you sit down, you were saying you write a script, but like you're sitting down and you're playing the game solo with the characters in your podcast, and you're just writing the outcomes down.
Yeah. So I'll sit down at my computer, and I'll have like index cards with the characters' stats on them. And I'll have the basic rule book, sadly in PDF form, to one side. And I'll have a dice rolling app. I don't even own dice. How sad is that?
Oh my gosh.
How sad
Jon.
is that? I know, it's embarrassing. That's how brand new I am back to role-playing games, is I don't even have dice. So I'm using an app to roll it. Anyway, so I sit down and I have an idea in my head, as I guess the sort of dungeon master role, of what the scenario is going to be. And then I just think, well, what would the characters do? And then I type out the narrative and some dialogue and try and give it as much flavor, and I try and make it gritty and feel somewhat real. I'd say that my stuff is nowhere near as gritty as Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings. I'm kind of trying to get to that, but I don't know. I think maybe I'm just not that serious of a person that I can't get it that dark. Well, maybe it does get that dark later on, but most of the time when I'm thinking about it, it's not quite. I don't know if you're familiar with turncloaks. That's some dark stuff. Mine's not quite as dark. Anyway, so I'll lay out the scenario. I'll have the characters react to whatever problem I put in front of them, and then I roll the dice, and just whatever happens logically, I just type it out. When I started doing this, as I said, I'd never even played 5th edition, still haven't. I hadn't heard of like the Mythic. Are you familiar with the Mythic system?
I think so. That's a solo.
It's a solo
like it dabs.
GM emulator. Yeah. And so I hadn't heard of it, and I'm not using it now. I think it's a pretty cool system, but I didn't start with it, so I'm not using it. But I guess the idea is kind of the same. You can run a game by yourself. All you really need are dice and just to adhere to logic, like what would anybody do in this situation, given their individual personalities and what would be best for them. So I kind of just let it play out in my head, and then I type it up. And I guess I've done it enough now that I kind of have a bit of a system that I'll kind of do that for maybe 10 pages, and then I'll record it and see kind of how much time it is, because I have a kind of a strict keep it under 30 minutes time limit. And then I'll kind of rinse and repeat and go back and sort of play some more, type some more script, record that. And when I get close to that 30-minute mark, I try and find what would be a good place to end off. So, and because it is a serial, I'm kind of hoping for something that has a bit of gravity to it, or a cliffhanger or something. There's a bit of that kind of writer's tricks built in, but it's all sort of bred or born of dice rolling and just me thinking, well, what would they do?
Okay.
So yeah, what you get in the podcast is it is real gameplay, although it is also scripted. So somebody on Twitter recently asked me, like, where can we get the unedited actual play? And I had to write back, like, this kind of is it. Like, that's it. There is no other thing.
That's kind of cool that somebody thought you were you had like a group, or you were actually playing like a huge thing. Yeah, that's cool. Now, are you just using like a generic fantasy setting? Are you creating kind of your own thing? Or are you using one of the established D&D ones?
I decided to create my own. I don't know. I always did this homebrew kind of thing, so I've never really used the Greyhawks or the Forgotten Realms or whatever. I think I've probably read all that stuff because it's a fun read, but I haven't used it, and always come back to doing my own stuff. Back way back when I was gaming, and for this too, I thought I'll just create this procedurally too. Like, so I don't have a map of the world. I have a map of just the spot of the story that I'm in. And then as the story requires more stuff, or as I throw stuff in for flavor, I add it to the map. And so it's actually grown quite a lot. And what episode am I on now? I'm only on episode 8, but the gameplay and the kind of the writing, so to speak, that's episode 20. And so actually I've already like completely gone off my map, and it's expanded, and there's NPCs that have been met and left behind, and so the world is actually it's generating procedurally. I think that's the right word for it, right?
Yeah, procedurally or organically, perhaps.
Yeah. It's kind of as I need a feature, it pops into existence, and then I add it to my ever expanding notes.
Usually, when I run a game, although I've been running Curse of Strahd for like almost a year now, but I usually just run my own things. And when I kind of run my own campaigns, I will do that same thing. I will just let things kind of appear. If I need a forest, I'll put a forest in. If I need a city, then I'll just get a city and put it in, and kind of just keep track as I'm going, because to me, kind of that note prep kind of way of running a game is just it just takes so much off the game master and off the dungeon master that because if you're always looking in a book or always looking at a map to try to figure out where you are and stuff, it just slows down the game. But if I just don't know what's up ahead, well, I can just make it up on the spot and kind of go with it, or use a resource to just plop a city in or something like that if I have a resource book or something like that. But I know other people don't like to play like that. Exactly. That is what I always find is it keeps things interesting for me as well as my players.
Yeah, and I think it's so cool that like then whatever you come up with, like that's your own thing, which I think is so much cooler than using a pre-gen one. Like there's nothing wrong with using a pre-gen one. It's just that I want to have as much creative input as possible. So why not let that include the world too?
I think there is something within every dungeon master or game master where even if they won't admit it, they kind of want to be a novelist or a filmmaker or something. And so this is our creative outlet. So we always have worlds and we always have situations and characters that we can introduce and problems and things that we can throw at our players.
You touch on something I've also been thinking about recently. It's incredible how much I've been thinking about RPGs lately compared to not very long ago. But let me get your hot take on this one. To what degree do you think role-playing games are like a distinct medium? Because you mentioned like novels, movies. Is a tabletop game, is it a kind of another, I don't want to say art, it's certainly not like a fine art, but is it another distinct mode of communication or a different media? It's something I've been wondering lately. What do you think?
I think it is. I know kind of the classic joke is for somebody who doesn't know what tabletop RPGs are to kind of like confuse them with a board game or something. But while it has similarities to board games, it is so different than a board game that it brings itself closer to like you're watching, you're sitting around a table improvising what could only be described as either a novel or a TV show or a movie. And because it is so collaborative in the storytelling. So I think it is something totally different. And the whole trend of actual play podcasts and actual play video shows on YouTube and stuff, which, by the way, was something that I did not see coming at all. Anytime that I was playing, a role-playing game, if somebody said, "Oh, I'll stop by for a little bit and I'll watch you play," I was always like, "Don't do it. You will hate it. You need to. You're welcome to play if you want, but like just don't watch." But now people are watching, people are listening, and I just totally miss that. But I think it is some type of. I know it's always kind of weird to use the word just like art kind of like out there, kind of in quotes or something. But there is something that is different about it than I think almost anything else.
Yeah, isn't it wild that Gygax and Arneson, they didn't just come up with like this best game ever, but possibly like an entire new medium isn't quite the right word, but entirely new mode of storytelling. It just blows my mind. It's like it's a big deal, I think.
I absolutely agree. And I think that's something that they would have been surprised by. And to a degree, well, of course they've both passed on now, but you could see it in some of their writings or some of their interviews, that were kind of in the 90s or in the early 2000s and stuff, where they were just saying things like, why are people acting, why are people play acting in this war game or something, like they even had a hard time almost, it seems like, understanding kind of the fascination of the role-playing element, like the desire for a lot of the players just to slip into the shoes and of their character, really to kind of go after that experience and really try to imagine the actual experience of their character.
Yeah, it's just wild.
I mean, I think it's the greatest hobby in the world. That's why I do all this stuff.
It is. For me, like I'm not a sports fan at all, like at all. But I could talk about this endlessly the way my friends can talk about hockey for 8 hours straight.
I know. And well, like we just had like a 25-minute conversation in this episode about comedy. And
before we started, I thought, are we going to be able to fill an interesting hour? I feel like we could do another one. I will make you though.
Yeah, no kidding. But I will try to respect your time. But
Apparently
anyway,
the oven has been turned on.
yes. So you got dinner coming,
Either
so we should probably
either
wrap this
that
up.
or the place is on fire
Yeah.
and has been for a while.
Well, hopefully it's dinner. So, but just really quickly before, while we're closing out, what does the future hold for the Tale of the Manticore, and where can people find it and listen to it?
Okay, I'll try and give you a longer answer than gee, I don't know as far as where it's going. So let me do the other one first. Where can you find it? Pretty much anywhere where you get podcasts. You can find Tale of the Manticore, but there's also a blog spot. So taleofthemanticore.blogspot.com exists, and that's just where I kind of like vomit up all of the errata and show notes and whatever's on my mind, and I update it once a week or something like that. A lot of it was just kind of like descriptions of me testing a microphone or some of the early stuff. So it really is just some process, some random thoughts and stuff going on there. Not for everybody, for sure. But certainly Apple and Spotify and all of the usual suspects has it. Or you can get it at taleofthemanticore.podbean.com, or you can play it off of the player on the blog spot. So yeah, anywhere your favorite podcatcher can get it. And I'm on Twitter at Manticore Tale. Tale of the Manticore was taken. And so I'm at Manticore Tale, and I'm on Instagram too. So all the kind of usual spots I'm lurking about. And as far as the future goes, well, I've played the game up to episode 20, and it's absolutely endless in sight. Self-isolation or social isolation has mean that I've had way more time to work on this than I was expecting. And so I've produced much more than I'd expected. And I'll actually be increasing my output over the summer, and I'll be releasing like 3 episodes a month instead of 2. I don't think I could possibly do more. And then when school comes back in session and I go back to my day job, I'm sure I'll kind of have to go back to 2 episodes. But I don't see an end, actually. I guess it'll end sometime, but as long as people are listening and I'm having fun doing it, I'm going to keep doing it. Don't ask me if I would do it if there wasn't a single listener, because that's a question I don't think I know how to answer.
I won't ask you. I won't ask you that question. But and then you mentioned all those places where people can find it. I will be sure to link up the podcast and your website and your social media in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. So anybody who's listening and they want to check out Tale of the Manticore, they can just head over to the show notes for this episode, and they will find links to where they can find it in their favorite podcatcher, or check out the website, or maybe tweet at you randomly on Twitter or something.
Please do. Yeah. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. All right. Well, John, it was a lot of fun having you on here today. Maybe I should have you back on and we could talk about how we hate comedy podcasts some more or something. No, of course I'm kidding. So,
I don't hate comedy podcasts. I hate joy. I hate comedy and I hate joy.
Yeah. I know. Yeah, me too. But anyway, thank you so much for being on the show today. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
It was a blast, Matt. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, there you have it, guys. Another episode in the books. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Jon. If you want to check out Jon's podcast, The Tale of the Manticore, you can head over to dicegeeks.com and find the show notes for this episode. I have provided links there so you can check out his podcast. Now, if you want some free stuff, head over to dicegeeks.com/free. You'll get 10 free dungeon maps. You'll never miss an episode of this show. And each and every Friday, you will get an email update from me telling you what is going on in the Dice Geeks universe. You don't want to miss out, guys. Seriously. If you enjoy this show, I would really appreciate your support in some way. You can review the show. You can rate the show. You can share the show with your friends. You can also support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/dicegeeks. Anything you do to help support the show is greatly appreciated. Until next Wednesday, keep gaming.